What I share with you each Sunday has been called a meditation since long before I was here, and I've been here for a long time. I think it was probably Bruce Sanguin who came up with that word to replace the traditional word sermon, so that it would be an understanding that it would be something different than what was happening in other congregations in the neighborhood around the world. That it wasn't a one-way thing of just expanding on the scriptural texts for the week, but that it was a deeper reflection, a sitting with those texts, a ruminating about them beyond just studying the contexts out of which they had been written, who had written them, who they'd written them for, what political or socioeconomic realities were around at the time of their writing. I think Bruce wanted to explore the sermon time in a new way and make of it something different from what it had been in the past. And I say Bruce just because I don't think that Tom Gilchrist would have come up with the idea of meditation, since Tom was far more traditionally rooted and unlikely to have stepped out in that manner. But I think the time has come for us to challenge that word again and to rethink it, because we have a class happening every Sunday night on meditation. And most people outside of these walls, when they think of the word meditation, it's not about an alternative to a sermon. It's not about sitting with a text and thinking about it and ruminating on it so that something new might come of it. Meditation is about something, a practice, something akin to prayer, into which people engage so that they might find their way to new truths within themselves, or bring into that space of meditation something that is of the outside world and consider it so that they might come into a new relationship with it. So meditation is something that is different from what I do here on Sunday mornings. So I was thinking, I've been trying to come up with a new word, and I've decided sermon is really it. Scott says, no, you didn't. No, I didn't. I thought maybe the word perspective would be okay. We'll try it on for a few weeks and see how it goes. But what I offer you is my perspective. And I offer my perspective so that you might offer me yours. I offer you my perspective so that you might take it out of this place and consider it and maybe share it with someone else, and they might offer you theirs, once you have built upon mine. It's perspective that changes absolutely everything in this world. Not the one that's going to come from up here on a Sunday morning, but the growth of perspective, the way it shifts and changes shape and color and texture as it is shared one person to the next. Perspective. So I'm going to have that slide changed for the next few weeks. We'll see how it sits, and let's have a conversation about whether perspective is what we might name this time of our gathering together. My hope is that the word perspective is one that might sit well with some of the philosophers of the 20th century who were talking about communication. And I'm going to reflect on Karl Jaspers and his thoughts about communication as we go through this time of perspective sharing. But I want first to talk about the act of communication. I have an almost 2-year-old grandson who is learning to communicate, coming up with words that he is introduced to and then uses almost immediately in what his parents and I believe is stunning and extraordinary brilliance. Well, I'm sure it is. But we come into this world with only one way to communicate. I encapsulated it a few weeks ago when I tried to sing a Sum 41 song, and it came out just as screaming. That's how Sum 41 sings, but it's also how we share our understanding, our perspective, our feelings as infants. When we come into this world, the only thing we can do is scream. And so we scream when we want something. We scream when we are hungry. We scream when we are uncomfortable. We scream when we are alone and we need someone to be with us to comfort us. And that screaming affects the people around us. I mean, very quickly, within the first hour or two of birth, people are responding to that really well. I don't know whether we figure that out that quickly, but it's an effective form of communication when you are a helpless babe needing something. Now, within a very short time, infants learn to communicate in a different way, and whether it is instinctual and it's hardwired into their brain or not, but those beautiful little grins that they give you, and the little coos, and the wiggling of the arms and the legs, communicate peace and comfort, and bring you into relationship with an infant in a new way, because the screaming means you have to interact in a very functional way as quickly as possible. But the cooing and the smiling and the gurgling and the laughter and the little grins and the kicking feet, they get you to interact in a very playful, very intimate manner with an infant. And so a new communication skill has been developed. From there, those first words that are kept forever engraved in a parent's heart, I can't tell you what one of my children's first words were because it's just not a nice word. But the other one said duck. That was her first word. But the first word on to the hundreds and hundreds of words that become our daily vocabulary help us to explain who we are to the people that we meet. Help us to share with them what our needs are, what our feelings are, what our desires and goals are. We use the words to explain and explore our world, often creating as we do the naming. As we name something good or something bad, we create a whole understanding of it, and we have an incredible power as we do that in this world. Arguing sometimes about our definitions of things. You name something good that I name bad, and so we have a conversation about what that means and why each of us calls it those things. And those conversations take place in every relationship, whether in the workplace, in the home, on the street, wherever. That line between the different definitions is when we explore, and we explore sometimes very carefully, or we don't explore it because it's just too difficult to get into that realm of difference in understanding. Those hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of words that we use in the course of our life are the words that we use to describe, to explain, to explore. And they are the words that we use to lift up and edify, to strengthen, to make beautiful, to enhance and make something, give something meaning and worth to the people around us. And they're also the words that we use to tear down and destroy. They're words that we use to cut people out of our lives. They're words that we use to harm and disfigure. So the question is, how do we use these words in ways that will continue to advance the ideals that we use when we say that the words of commitment together, the as I live every day? How do we use those words in ways that make that happen in a real and helpful and positive manner? Because there are many places in our lives where we run up against differences of opinion, differences of understanding, where someone does something which we feel is wrong and they have wronged us, and we want to get into that conversation because we know the only way forward is through it. There's been a lot of work done on this, primarily because there's a lot of money at stake. In the corporate world, if you can't actually make yourself clear, or if you make yourself clear in a way that destroys the relationships you have with the people around you, you're going to fail miserably. You're not likely going to be able to attract clients to your company. You're not likely going to be able to keep the clients in your company. You're not likely going to be able to oversee or manage the people in your company in a way you may have the responsibility to do. Or you might not be able to manage the relationship you have with someone who has the responsibility for telling you what to do. And so books have proliferated on how to communicate appropriately in the workplace. And they're good books. There's some excellent books on how to communicate appropriately in the workplace. But there are also books, and there's a huge need, on how to communicate properly within intimate relationships, within households, with partners as they struggle their way forward. Because if you don't struggle your way forward, you stay in the same place. So between the risk that happens in the corporate world and the need to find our way forward in our personal worlds, there's a whole host of books out there that we can explore. I'm going to share some of the ideas from one particular book, which I've used in the past, called Difficult Conversations. I'm going to share with you some of these ideas before we go on and talk about Carl Jaspers. Difficult conversations are not the ones that are, just hard sometimes. They're about difficult conversations. I remember seeing an ad in a 1920s magazine that said, "The challenge of halitosis," which of course is bad breath. It was an advertisement for some kind of mouthwash, and everyone knows that that conversation is a difficult one. To tell someone that they've got bad breath is something nobody really wants to do. But that's not the kind of difficult conversation I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of conversation where we get into a space that is so uncomfortable because we think someone is being unfair, treating us poorly, hasn't heard us or recognized or honored who we are, and are wrong. And how do you tell someone that they're wrong and that they're treating you badly without, being mean? We had dinner with Scott's daughter yesterday, and someone looked at her and said, "Don't be mean," and she burst into tears. Scott's, granddaughter. No, his daughter didn't burst into tears. His granddaughter burst into tears. We have the similar reaction. Whenever we think that we might be mean about something, it sort of churns something in us. And so rather than having that conversation with that person who has been totally wrong, we often back away from it and stifle it and don't say anything. So again, we have these two extremes. Don't say anything, or railroad your opinion over top of someone else and leave them bleeding and wounded in a ditch somewhere. Books like Difficult Conversations can help us navigate that water, give us practical tips on how to do that, how to get through those conversations. And they grow out of the Harvard School, which is about negotiation and communications. Harvard has a program that you can go to do that kind of negotiating skill that brings people together in divorce, in corporate challenges, and helps them negotiate a middle way. It's a mediation program. And this book has come out of some of the learnings from that. But in the conversations where we're really in a difficult situation and our understanding of ourselves is invested in that, there are several things going on. And he says there's usually 3 conversations going on in the middle of that conversation. The first one is the what happened conversation. What is happening? What happened? What made this situation develop? Many of you, I'm hoping, expecting most of you, otherwise it's my problem, but many of you, I'm sure, do that sort of going back over the whole thing and thinking, okay, where did this start? Who started this? It wasn't me. What was the first thing to happen here? And that what happened is part of the conversation that's going on. Another part of the conversation that's going on is a feelings conversation about whether my feelings are hurt or whether I'm incensed because you were so insensitive, or whether I'm sad or whether I'm angry. And that conversation is going on at the same time. And the next one that's going on, sometimes underneath those ones, is the identity question. Who am I? How do you feel about me? When you come and treat me like this, what does that say about who I am? Those 3 conversations are taking place within that conversation, but nobody usually knows that those three things are going on. We're just having a conversation or an argument, as it often turns out to be. So the authors of this book, who come through that Harvard program, bring us ways to deal with those different things, breaking that history question apart into truth and intention and blame. When we go into a conversation, you have the truth. I mean, each person knows what happened. They have a crystal clear picture of what went on. They know the history and could probably, if they were mad enough, type a 10-page long outline of what exactly happened into their computer to hand it to you. But truth is, of course, perspective-oriented. And truth is owned by different people in different ways, because we have different information. I know who I am, but I don't know who you are. So I can't possibly bring to the conversation the information about you that you can bring to the conversation, so I don't have all the truth. When it comes to sharing truth, to trying to explore and put on the table, this is how I saw it and this is how you saw it, it's a different conversation that you're having. You're looking for figuring out how people affected the situation instead of who to blame, which is another part. And the who to blame never falls squarely on one person or another. There's usually some complexities there. So trying to find out the history of what really happened and sharing, what were the different considerations here? What went into making this mistake? How was I involved, and how are you involved? And one of the biggest ones that flails me on a regular basis is that I impute intention. I'm assuming that Scott did something because he's trying to prove that he's always right. Or I think that my mother did something because she always liked my sister better anyway. Or we give intentions to people when we couldn't possibly have any idea what their intentions were. And if we opened that conversation, we may be more likely to learn what those intentions were and find out that they're miles away from where we are. The stories that we've told ourselves since we were children and repeated over and over and over and over again, those stories are screaming at us as soon as we walk into any kind of an altercation like that. And those stories will help us paste intention on anyone we're talking to, because that's what we've always done. And so intention, for me personally, is the hardest one to pull away so that I can really see who it is I'm talking to and ask them what their intentions really were. So what was the history of this and the feelings conversation, which rarely takes place in a really good argument. I mean, explaining how it felt when you said that to me doesn't happen. I'm just mad at you for saying it, and so I'm going to get at you for saying it. And the story about identity, what does this say about me? What does it say about you? What does it say about our relationship? How many times did that come into one of your most recent conversations? We leave those things at the door. But these authors help us see that if we bring them to the surface, we can find out so much more and find our way to a deeper, richer relationship of the situation, but most importantly, of ourselves. When we started a few weeks ago, Scott had suggested that we talk about ourselves as being grounded in life. That the things of life, we're part of them. And the discovery of how communication develops, where it takes part in the brain, what happens when two people interact, and what parts of their brains are sparked, and the whole science of communication is a part of life, and we are totally fused with that. We can't separate ourselves from those realities. We might be able to train our brain to do a few different things, but we can't separate ourselves from the fact that we have a brain that operates around communication in a certain way, that scientifically is proven. We are grounded in life. Reading books like the book I've mentioned by these Harvard professors about communication, or the book by by Michael Sandel on justice. Those things help us grow in our understanding and our wisdom of things. But how we are guided by love is a different story, and I think that's the story about what this place is about. It's about guiding ourselves by love. So when we come to these broken down communication things, broken down so that we can understand them and explore them the next time we're in the middle of it with somebody, how we are guided by love in that conversation is the more important nuance, I believe, and how we as a community head off into that little space between the realities in which we are grounded and the possibilities that we can learn and how to function in that. That idea of being guided by love is what we are about. And there I turn to Karl Jaspers. Karl Jaspers was a German philosopher born in 1883 to a middle-income, fairly supportive family. And he grew and became a psychologist who wrote largely in that field and was recognized for his contributions to that field. But when he was about 40, he kind of shifted and started studying and exploring and writing within the field of philosophy instead of just in psychology. And in that field, he's understood to be one of the fathers of existentialism, though he never called himself an existentialist. But his philosophy is deeply grounded in the reality that he was a German in Germany, working at the University of Heidelberg, married to a Jewish woman, Gertrude Meyer. And so, married to a Jewish woman as a German during the rise of the Third Reich was a threatening, challenging experience. And so he, as the Third Reich was growing and into the war, he was constantly getting into that space where the guided by love was a significant part of his work. He couldn't just look at the scientific, psychological work that he had done before and find answers in that. And he couldn't look outside his own personal realm and find answers that he could relate to in his country. And so he found himself within the confines of being guided by love, which within his community was more and more challenging every day. And he says that one of the things that we must do when we get to the point where science or where our experience of the external world no longer makes sense to us, we have to take a leap into those places, those aspects of our lives that are not tangible, that can't be measured or placed on a microscope slide, that can't be weighed, that can't be scientifically studied. You could take my brain apart into a billion pieces and study it and come to understand it completely, and you'd never be able to recreate one of my thoughts. Not yet, anyway. I mean, maybe that will happen into the future, but there's this whole sense of beingness, this whole reality to life that Jaspers was saying cannot be explored in a radically, exclusively scientific way. And he called that part of our life, that time when we make that leap beyond just what is, into who we are and how we are together, and into the relationships that happen between us when we truly communicate. Existence with a Z on the end of it. Existence. This is our existence. And communication, appropriate, good, relationship building, positive communication is when existence is happening, is being created by two people in conversation. Toward the end of the war, Karl Jaspers and his wife, he had been prohibited from teaching and then prohibited from writing, and they were scheduled to be taken to an extermination camp by the Nazis. And within 2 weeks of the date, the town in which they were living was liberated, and they were spared that experience. So he was able to take his belief in existence and his belief that it existed in every single person, regardless of what they had done during that war. He was able to take that and build it into his philosophy of communication, his philosophy of how each of us has something to offer, about how we can't just live by slogans or 140-character tweets. We have to sit in a room with people with whom we disagree, people who we don't see eye to eye with, people who have no appreciation for where we're coming from. And we have to celebrate existence. We have to find a way to communicate. We have to do what these Harvard professors do and go back over some of the history, exploring how we got here. What was it that made you do that? How could you possibly? How could I have done what I did? How could I possibly? And when we put those things together in a room, we create a whole reality which didn't exist before. And we can step into that reality in a way that we never could before it was created. For Karl Jaspers, communication was the essence of life. It was the possibility for evolution. It was the hope of something new and something different in the world. It was the chance to be a humanity that could be loving and just and compassionate and free and searching ever for truth, which would unfold constantly, because as soon as we get there, it rolls away ahead of us. Karl Jaspers believed in what you have to say. Karl Jaspers believed that you needed to say it. Karl Jaspers believed that if you didn't say it, there was no possible way that the world could ever unfold like that, because existence would die. That's the part of this community that I think is the most important. The Friday night conversation at the Justice Study. The Tuesday morning Labyrinth group that sits and opens their hearts up to each other each week. The conversations that take place in between those who were at Lillian's bedside when she was in the hospital and connecting with Paul through the whole of her illness. The opportunities we have to be with one another, to care and support, all of that is hugely important. And it has its greatest opportunity to shine. It has its greatest potential to create an alternate reality. It has the greatest possibility of becoming my most fervent hope when in between our perspectives, when they clash, when we hit a crossroads, we sit down and we have the conversation. I think that that fusion of freedom and reason and communication has been telling us much over these past decades since he first talked about existence. And we've been talking about it here for many, many, many years. So let us keep that conversation going. Let us create realities that never were before. And let us find ways to walk into them, discomforting as it may be. For once we are inside, oh, what the world might be. Communication is one of our greatest gifts. May we ever use it with courage, with humility, and with an incredible vision of a world it might create. Amen.